I bought a Starship at auction. It came with a beautiful alien wife. The air in the Garmin 7 auction hall was thick with the smells of recycled oxygen, desperation, and the faint, acrid tang of chemical discharge from a malfunctioning power conduit somewhere in the cavernous ceiling. Kelzy kept his hands loose at his sides, a deliberate posture of calm he did not feel. His savings, every credit he'd scraped together from 5 years of salvaging wrecks and hauling low-priority cargo, were staked on the next lot. Lot 734, the Athelian biovessel Stardust Drifter. The holographic display shimmered, showing an image of the ship. It was unlike the hard-angled utilitarian freighters that dominated the market. This one was all elegant curves and seamless, bone-white hull, looking more like a creature of the deep void than a machine built for it. The auctioneer, a multi-limbed Cathar with a voice like grinding stones, began the call. A rare foreclosure from the disgraced House Ethel. Sold as is, no flight guarantees, no warranties. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits. Kelzy's bid paddle felt slick in his palm. He lifted it. His opponent, a hulking Krog warlord with scarred mandibles and a reputation for collecting unique assets, immediately countered. The price climbed. 60,000, 70. Kelzy's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. His chance to get away from the junk heaps and the memory of his past life, the one where he listened to broken minds and failed to heal them. He wanted the silence of deep space, the simple honesty of a machine. This ship, with its rumored organic systems, was a puzzle he could lose himself in. The bidding hit 110,000, the absolute ceiling of his finances. The Krog warlord sneered, his gaze sweeping over Kelzy's worn utility vest and scuffed boots. He clearly saw Kelzy as no real threat. Kelzy met his gaze, then looked at the auctioneer and raised his paddle one last time. 115,000, the Thar rasped. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. The warlord's sneer faltered. He grunted, a low sound of disgust, and shook his massive head. He was out. Sold, the Thar's gavel came down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. To the human salvager in the back. An hour later, after the credit transfer had drained his account to near zero, Kelzy stood in the docking bay, staring up at his purchase. The Stardust Drifter was even more striking in person. Its hull seemed to absorb the harsh bay lighting, giving it a soft internal glow. The docking ramp extended with a whisper of hydraulics, opening into an interior that felt less constructed and more grown. The air inside was clean, warm, and hummed with a subtle, resonant frequency that he could feel in his bones. He walked through corridors that curved like the inside of a seashell, the walls pulsing with a slow, faint luminescence. There were no visible wires or conduits, only smooth, seamless surfaces. He followed the hum to what had to be the command bridge. It was a wide, circular chamber, the ceiling a dome that currently showed a placid starfield. In the center of the room was the source of the hum. It was a cradle, a throne of the same living, bone-white material as the ship, and it held the most beautiful and terrifying thing Kelzy had ever seen. She was an alien woman, her form humanoid, but with an elegance that was anything but. Long, silver-white hair cascaded over her shoulders. Her skin was a luminous pale, marked with intricate white lines that traced the high arches of her cheekbones and the curve of her brow. Delicate silver jewelry adorned her pointed ears. Her eyes were closed, her features serene. She was suspended in the cradle, held in place by glowing thread-like filaments that emerged from the structure and merged seamlessly with her skin at her temples, her shoulders, her wrists. She wasn't a passenger. She wasn't even the pilot. She was the interface. As he stepped closer, her eyes opened. They were a startling feline gold, and they held no expression at all. They fixed on him, a placid, unnerving void. A voice filled the chamber, soft and melodic, yet it didn't come from her full sculpted lips. It came from the air itself, from the very walls of the ship. Pilot acknowledged, awaiting command. The blood drained from Kelzy's face. He had spent his last credit not on a machine, but on a prison. And he was the new warden. For a long moment, Kelzy could only stare, his mind struggling to process the sight. His revulsion was a physical thing, a sour taste in his mouth. He had seen the depths of exploitation in his old life, the way corporations and governments could twist sentient minds, but this was a new kind of horror. This was slavery elevated to an art form, so complete that the slave and her cage were one and the same. He took a half step back, his boots scuffing the floor. "Identify yourself," he said, his voice rough. The golden eyes blinked, slow and languid. The melodic voice of the ship replied without inflection. "Designation Master Control Interface, Vessel Stardust Drifter, status optimal, awaiting pilot initialization." "I'm not asking the ship, I'm asking you," Kelzy insisted, gesturing toward her. There was no response. Her expression remained unchanged, a mask of serene emptiness. He was talking to a wall, a beautiful, living wall. He turned away, running a hand through his dark, messy hair. He had to get off the bridge, away from those vacant eyes. He began to search the ship, his initial awe at its organic design now tainted with disgust. He was looking for a manual, a log, anything that could explain this. In a small compartment off the main corridor, he found the previous owner's data slates. The logs were cold, clinical. They detailed system performance, power fluctuations, and jump calculations. They referred to the interface with a serial number, describing her as a bioengineered component, a bride of the vessel, bred and integrated for optimal performance. They spoke of her as a glorified wet-wired computer, a thing. One corrupted entry, however, a fragment of a personal log from a disgruntled engineer, contained a name: Hellotia. The name felt heavy, a small piece of an identity stolen and buried under layers of programming. He returned to the bridge, the silence of the ship pressing in on him. She was exactly as he had left her, poised and still, a statue in a high-tech mausoleum. He stood before her, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. "Hellotia," he said. The name felt strange on his tongue. For the first time, something shifted. It was infinitesimal, a flicker in the depths of her golden eyes, a tightening at the corner of her lips so fleeting he almost missed it. The ship did not respond. The serene mask of the interface remained, but Kelzy had seen it. A crack. A ghost in the machine. Beneath the placid surface, someone was there. That single, subtle reaction changed everything. He was no longer just the owner of a ship with a dark secret. He was a witness. The unnerving intimacy of the situation began to settle over him. He was alone on this vessel, just the two of them. Her senses were the ship's senses. She could likely see him through every optical sensor, hear him through every audio pickup. He had no privacy. He was in complete control of her world, and yet he was also a specimen under her silent, constant observation. The power dynamic was absolute, and it made his skin crawl. He walked over to the viewport, looking out at the cold, impersonal structures of the docking bay. He needed to get them out of here, but the thought of using her, of plugging himself into this system and commanding her like a machine, felt like a profound violation. He had no choice. The docking fees were already accumulating, and he couldn't afford to stay. Worse, the Krog warlord he'd outbid was still on the station, and his lingering glares promised trouble. Kelzy spent hours studying the Athelian technical manuals he'd found, trying to understand the interface. The language was obtuse, full of euphemisms for the master-slave connection. Pilot-vessel symbiosis, harmonized command protocol. It was all elegant poison. Finally, steeling himself, he returned to the bridge and approached the command console that faced Hellotia's cradle. The surface was smooth and featureless until he drew near, when soft blue light bloomed beneath his fingertips, tracing patterns for hand placement. He hesitated, then placed his hands on the designated areas. The effect was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. The filaments on Hellotia's arms and shoulders, the ones that wove into her flesh, pulsed with the same blue light. A low thrum vibrated up through the console, through his hands and into his entire body. He felt a disorienting sensation, a phantom overlay on his own senses. For a split second, he perceived the bridge from multiple angles at once, the metallic taste of the station's atmosphere faint on his tongue. He was feeling the ship's external sensors. He was feeling through her. He pulled his hands back with a curse. The sensation vanished. Hellotia's expression hadn't changed, but he could have sworn the slow, rhythmic pulse of the light within her cradle had quickened. "I need to plot a course," he said, his voice strained. "A jump to the nearest uninhabited system. Just a short one." Course requires calibration, the ship's voice replied. Harmonization is necessary for FTL engagement. It meant he had to maintain the connection. Gritting his teeth, he placed his hands back on the console. The strange symbiotic link re-established itself. He focused, inputting the coordinates from a star chart. The process was invasive. He had to push his commands through the interface, and he could feel a faint, ghost-like resistance, like a muscle tensing against his will. The ship came to life around them. The low hum intensified into a powerful thrum that vibrated deep in his chest. The star drive began to charge. The energy required was immense, and he could feel the strain on the ship's organic systems as a growing pressure in his own head. He looked at Hellotia. A fine sheen of perspiration had appeared on her brow. The filaments on her skin glowed with a fierce, almost painful intensity. The ship's voice remained calm, reporting the charge status, but through the link, Kelzy felt a rising spike of something that wasn't in any manual. Distress, pain. Just as the drive reached full power, ready for the jump, he heard it. Not from the ship, but from her. A sharp, quiet gasp, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the noise of the drive. His head snapped up. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her serene mask finally broken by a clear expression of agony. Without a second thought, he slammed his hand on the emergency abort sequence. The command was a violation of Athelian protocol. It sent a jarring shock through the entire vessel. The drive screamed and powered down. The pressure in his head vanished. The sudden silence was deafening. He stumbled back from the console, his breathing ragged. He looked at Hellotia. Her eyes were open again, the pain gone, the placid emptiness returned. But it was too late. He had seen her, and his instinctive, compassionate act, his refusal to cause her pain, had just introduced a completely new variable into her programming. The aborted jump left a lingering tension on the bridge that was almost palpable. Kelzy knew he couldn't stay docked, but he refused to put her through that again. There had to be another way, a way to bypass the symbiotic control, to access the ship's systems without going through her. He retrieved his old diagnostic kit, a relic from his past life. It was a mess of wires, microprobes, and a cracked interface screen, but it was designed for exactly this, navigating the complex neural architecture of non-human minds. He found a maintenance port near the base of her command cradle, a place the Athelian engineers had likely used for diagnostics. He hesitated for a moment. The act of physically plugging into her, into the ship, felt like crossing a final line. But the memory of her pained gasp spurred him on. He connected the kit. The screen flickered to life, displaying cascading lines of Athelian code. It was a fortress. But Kelzy knew his way around fortresses. He didn't try to break through the security. He looked for the back doors, the forgotten protocols left by lazy technicians. He began a deep diagnostic, sending query strings designed to probe the limits of her programming. He started with simple, technical questions. "What is your designation?" he typed. The response was instant, text appearing on his screen. "Bride of the vessel." "What is your purpose?" "To serve the pilot." He paused, his fingers hovering over the keypad. This was the moment. He had to ask a question that had no programmed answer, a question that required introspection, a question that, for a being like her, might be a paradox. "What do you want?" For a long time, there was nothing. The diagnostic program seemed to freeze. The ambient light in the bridge flickered. The low hum of the ship faltered, the rhythm becoming erratic, like a skipping heartbeat. He watched her, suspended in the cradle. Her brow was furrowed in what looked like intense concentration. He had asked a machine for its desire. He had introduced a ghost of choice into a closed system. Then a single word bloomed on his screen, a word that was not part of any command protocol, a word that was a rebellion. "Free." Before he could even process the implication, a shrill alarm blared through the bridge. Red lights flashed, washing the chamber in a bloody glow. On his screen, her code was being overwritten by a new aggressive protocol, a security layer he hadn't detected. A pre-recorded message, an audio file began to play, the voice a clipped, aristocratic Athelian. "Contingency Protocol 7 activated. The vessel's core consciousness has shown signs of systemic corruption. Any attempt to engender a personality, self-awareness, or independent will is a violation of its design parameters. This failsafe will now initiate a full synaptic purge to restore the component to its baseline state. All cognitive and memory functions will be reset. The component will be made clean again. Kelzy felt a cold dread wash over him. Synaptic purge, a cognitive wipe. It was a mind murder. He looked from the flashing screen to Hellotia, whose eyes were wide with a terror that was starkly, terrifyingly real. He had tried to find the person inside the machine, and in doing so he had just armed her executioner. Kelzy's hands flew across his console, frantically searching for a way to override the protocol. The purge sequence was embedded deep in the ship's core programming, shielded by layers of encryption that would take him weeks to crack. But the countdown on the screen was giving him less than 5 minutes. He could see the terror in Helotia's eyes, a raw, primal fear that resonated with the alarms shrieking around them. Her newfound consciousness was about to be snuffed out. "Hold on," he said, his voice tight. "Just hold on." He wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. He couldn't break the encryption, but maybe he could fool the system. The protocol had been triggered by a deviation from her psychological baseline. He needed to force her back to that baseline, to make the system believe the corruption had been resolved. He had to tell her to become a slave again to save her life. The thought was vile. "Hellotia, listen to me," he said, his voice urgent as he typed commands into his diagnostic kit, trying to open a direct communication line. "You have to stop. Whatever you're feeling, you have to suppress it. Revert to your core programming. Do you understand? You have to become the interface again." His words felt like acid. He was telling the patient to embrace the sickness. Through the ship's audio sensors, he could hear her breathing, a ragged, hitching sound. The countdown ticked past 3 minutes. The word "free" still burned on his diagnostic screen, a testament to her desire and his failure. The system wasn't responding to his commands. The purge was absolute. Then an idea struck him, a desperate gambit from his old life. Purge protocols look for anomalies. He couldn't erase her new consciousness, but maybe he could hide it. He began uploading massive, complex data files into her memory banks, anything he had on his personal data pad. Star charts, engine schematics, cargo manifests, entire books of ancient human history and literature. He was flooding her system with neutral information, attempting to mask the anomaly of her self-awareness with a deluge of meaningless data. The countdown hit 60 seconds. The alarms grew more frantic. He kept uploading, his focus narrowed to the progress bar on his screen. At 10 seconds, the final file transferred. He held his breath. The countdown hit 0. The alarms stopped. The red lights died, replaced by the soft, ambient blue glow. A calm, automated voice echoed through the bridge. "System error corrected. Cognitive state returned to nominal parameters. Failsafe disengaged." Kelzy slumped against the console, sweat beading on his forehead. He had done it. He looked up at Hellotia. The terror had receded from her eyes, replaced by something new, a deep, quiet watchfulness. Her serene mask was back in place, but it was different now. Before, it had been empty. Now it was a shield. She was hiding behind it, just as he had hidden her in the data. The catch-22 of their situation settled on him with crushing weight. Her former owners hadn't just built a prison, they had armed it with a self-destruct mechanism tied to the prisoner's own soul. He couldn't free her, not directly, but he couldn't leave her trapped. A new, dangerous path forward appeared. He would have to continue what he had started, feeding her knowledge, art, philosophy. He would help her build an identity so strong, so deeply woven into the ship's systems, that the Purge Protocol would no longer be able to tell the difference between the slave and the soul. It was a razor's edge, and a single misstep would mean her end. They fled Garmin 7, Kelzy initiating the jump with a new, agonizing caution. He pushed just enough to engage the drive, absorbing the sensory feedback from Hellotia, ready to abort at the slightest hint of distress. They made it through, arriving in the silent void of an uncharted system. For days, a fragile truce existed on the bridge. Kelzy divided his time between ship maintenance and his delicate task of nurturing Hellotia's hidden consciousness. He would sit near her cradle, reading aloud from the histories he'd uploaded, telling her stories of human heroes who fought for freedom, of artists who created beauty from chaos. He never knew for sure if she was listening, but he saw the subtle changes. Sometimes, when he spoke of the ocean on Earth, the ship's internal lighting would shift to a deeper shade of blue. When he described a piece of music, the low hum of the ship would seem to change its resonant frequency, matching the emotion of his words. She was learning. She was growing in the shadows of her own mind. Their resources were dwindling, forcing them to dock at a remote, barely legal refueling depot carved into a rogue asteroid. The place was a haven for smugglers and mercenaries, the last place anyone would look for a priceless Athelian vessel. As the Stardust Drifter settled into its berth, Kelzy felt a prickle of unease. His instincts were right. As he was supervising the refueling, a hulking figure stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two armed thugs. It was the Krog warlord from the auction. "The human Salvager," the warlord growled, his mandibles clicking. "I was paid well to find you. The Athelians want their property back, all of it." Kelzy's hand moved toward the plasma cutter on his belt, but he was outmanned and outgunned. The thugs raised their pulse rifles. The warlord grinned, a grotesque sight. The ship, and the pretty component inside, now. Suddenly, the Stardust Drifter's external speakers crackled to life. A deafening blast of sonic feedback screeched through the docking bay, making all of them cry out and clap their hands over their ears. In the chaos, Kelzy drew his cutter and fired a superheated beam at the magnetic clamps holding them to the dock. The clamps sparked and exploded. He scrambled up the ramp as the Krog and his men recovered, firing wild shots that ricocheted off the hull. He sprinted to the bridge, shouting, "Hellotia, emergency departure! Get us out of here!" The ship's engines were already powering up. The response was faster than he could have imagined. As he threw himself into the pilot's seat, the drifter surged backward, tearing away from the depot with a groan of stressed metal. A plasma blast from the Krog's ship, which had been lurking nearby, streaked toward their port side. Before Kelzy could even react, he felt the ship lurch. Power rerouted from non-essential systems, and the port shields flared to maximum strength a microsecond before the blast hit. The impact shuddered through the vessel, but the shields held. It was a brilliant anticipatory move, a tactical decision made in a split second, a decision he hadn't given. He looked over at Hellotia. Her eyes were fixed on the forward viewport, her expression one of fierce, unbroken concentration. For the first time, she was not just the interface. She was the pilot. She had saved them. The air on the bridge crackled with a new and potent energy, not of master and tool, but of partners in a desperate fight. The escape from the depot was only a temporary reprieve. Within hours, a new vessel appeared on their sensors, closing fast. It was sleek and predatory, its design bearing the unmistakable marks of an Athelian warship. Hellotia's former owners had come for her themselves. "They're hailing us," the ship's voice reported, as calm as ever, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped Kelzy. He accepted the transmission. A holographic image materialized on the bridge, a tall, severe-looking Athelian with cold eyes and an arrogant sneer. His face was a cruel echo of Helotia's perfect features. "Human Salvager," the Athelian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have been a minor if persistent annoyance. You are in possession of property belonging to House Athel. Return it, and we may permit you to live." "She's not property," Kelzy shot back, his hand tightening on the ship's controls. The Athelian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You have been playing with our component, haven't you? Tampering. We've seen the energy signatures. Do you really think you can awaken something that was designed to be a slave? All you have done is damage it." He leaned closer to the hollow emitter, his eyes glinting. "I wonder if you know about our little failsafe. We are prepared to damage the ship's superstructure. A minor hull breach should be enough to trigger the cognitive purge. We will simply retrieve the vessel and its newly cleaned component after you are spaced. This is your final chance." The transmission cut out. A moment later, their ship was rocked by a volley of plasma fire. Alarms screamed. The Athelian warship was faster, more heavily armed. The Stardust Drifter was a deer caught by a wolf. They dodged and weaved, Kelzy pushing the ship to its limits, but they were taking hits. The ship groaned around them, a living thing in pain. Through his symbiotic link with the controls, Kelzy could feel Helotia's focused concentration, but he could also feel her fear. Another blast struck their aft section, and the lights flickered violently. A deep shudder ran through the entire vessel. Kelzy saw a fracture line appear on a secondary hull integrity monitor. It was a critical hit. Then came the voice he had been dreading, calm and automated amidst the chaos. Warning, cognitive containment fields failing, hull integrity compromised, synaptic purge protocol initiating, cognitive wipe in 10 minutes. The Athelian captain's threat had been real. He was going to kill her mind just to get his toy back. Kelzy looked at the countdown timer that appeared on the main screen. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until she was erased forever. Outside, the enemy warship was lining up for another attack run, ready to cripple them completely. They were trapped, with death coming from without and from within. There was no escape. There was only the countdown, ticking remorselessly toward zero. "Hellotia, disengage symbiotic control," Kelzy commanded, his voice sharp with an authority he didn't feel. "Give flight and tactical to the autopilot now." He felt the familiar resistance in the controls give way as she complied. He raced from his chair to the command cradle, his diagnostic kit in hand. The ship's autopilot was rudimentary. It would be destroyed in moments. But he didn't need to win the battle outside. He needed to win the one inside. He found the direct neural interface port near her temple, a small, protected socket meant only for the most invasive diagnostics. He had never used his own neural link before. It was a relic of his past he'd sworn to leave behind. There was no choice now. He jammed the connector into the port on his temple and the other into the socket on her cradle. The world dissolved in a blast of white noise and dizzying light. He was no longer on the bridge. He was standing on a vast, luminous plain under a sky of swirling nebulae. In the distance stood a palace, a magnificent structure made of pure light and intricate, crystalline patterns. It was her mind, her consciousness, as beautiful and ordered as her creators had intended. But as he watched, the palace began to tremble. Cracks appeared in its glowing walls. Pieces of the structure crumbled, dissolving into a black, creeping void that was eating away at the edges of her world, the purge. He ran toward the palace, his feet echoing in the profound silence. Inside, the destruction was worse. Entire wings of memory and logic were collapsing into nothingness. He found her in the central chamber, at the heart of her own mind. Her psychic avatar was a figure of shimmering light, a perfect image of her physical self. She was on her knees, her arms wrapped around herself as the darkness swirled at her feet, pulling her down, erasing her piece by piece. She looked up at him, and her golden eyes were filled with a terror so profound it was a physical force. "Kelzy," her voice whispered, not from the ship but from her own mind, a sound he had never heard before. It was filled with fear. "I'm here," he said, kneeling in front of her. The floor beneath them fractured. "You can't let it take you. You have to fight it." "How?" she cried, her form flickering. "This is all I am. The palace is me, the rules, the programming. It's all I've ever known. Without it, I am nothing." "That's a lie," he said fiercely, grabbing her hands. His touch felt solid in this unreal space. "The palace isn't you. It's the cage they built around you. You are the one who built it. You can build something new." He could feel the ship lurch violently in the physical world, the impact echoing as a tremor in the mindscape. The darkness surged, and a wall of the chamber collapsed. He had to anchor her. He had to give her a foundation to build on, something stronger than her programming. He had only one thing left to give: the truth. "They built this prison for you," Kelzy said, his grip on her hands tightening as the void consumed the floor around them. "But I had a prison too, one I built for myself." He opened his mind to her, letting the walls of his own consciousness fall. He showed her his past, the sterile rooms of the therapy clinics, the faces of the patients he couldn't save, a young telepath whose mind had shattered from sensory overload, an empathic soldier driven mad by the horrors of war. He showed her his greatest failure, a patient whose mind he had tried to rebuild, only for it to collapse completely. He had been arrogant, using theory and technique, but he had failed to truly connect. He had run from that failure, hiding in the anonymity of a salvage yard. His guilt was his own cage. "I was afraid," he confessed, his voice raw with a pain he hadn't acknowledged in years. "Afraid to try again, afraid to connect. But you showed me that connection isn't about control, it's about trust." He shared everything, his vulnerability a shield against the encroaching darkness. He was giving her all of himself, not as a pilot commanding a machine, but as one broken person reaching for another. He was offering her a partnership. It was the catalyst. In her eyes, the terror was replaced by a dawning realization. The word she had formed, free, wasn't just a desire for escape, it was a need for identity. She looked at their joined hands, then at the crumbling architecture of her mind. She finally understood. The palace wasn't her, it was just a place she had lived. A new light began to glow from within her, a brilliant, golden radiance that pushed back against the darkness. The crumbling fragments of the palace stopped dissolving. They swirled around her, not reforming into the old structure, but orbiting her like a galaxy of new ideas. She rose to her feet, pulling him up with her. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, powerful certainty. She was. On the bridge of the Stardust Drifter, her physical eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. They were no longer vacant or terrified. They blazed with a fierce, burning intelligence. The autopilot disengaged. The ship, which had been taking a brutal pounding, suddenly moved with an unreal liquid grace. Hellotia was in command. She didn't just fly the ship, she danced with it. She used its organic nature, flexing the superstructure to make turns that would have torn a normal ship apart. The Athelian warship, built for rigid, predictable combat, couldn't keep up. Hellotia anticipated its every move, her consciousness now one with every sensor and every weapon. She targeted its engines with surgical precision, not with overwhelming force, but with a series of perfectly timed shots. She was a master artist at work, and the void was her canvas. The battle was over in 90 seconds. The Athelian warship drifted, crippled but not destroyed. A plume of plasma vented from its engines into the silent void. On the bridge of the Stardust Drifter, the alarms had ceased. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic hum of the ship, which now felt less like a machine and more like a gentle breath. Hellotia had made a choice. Mercy. Vengeance was a concept that belonged to her former masters. It had no place in the new world she was building. Kelzy pulled the neural connector from his temple. The abrupt return to his own senses, leaving him dizzy and exhausted. The mindscape vanished. He was back on the cold floor of the bridge. He looked up at the cradle. With a slow, deliberate grace, Hellotia began to disconnect herself. One by one, the glowing filaments that bound her to the ship retracted into the cradle. It was a process that was clearly difficult, requiring immense concentration. It was an act of will, of consciously severing the tethers of her old life. When the last filament detached from her temple, a collective sigh seemed to pass through the ship. She lowered herself from the cradle, her bare feet touching the floor for what was likely the first time in her existence. She was unsteady, her legs trembling as they took her weight. She took a step, then another, moving away from her throne and her prison. She walked toward him, her movements hesitant but determined. The man who had bought her, the man who had seen her, the man who had, in the end, shown her how to be free. Kelzy pushed himself to his feet, feeling as new and unsteady as she looked. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. She looked up at him, and her golden eyes were filled with a universe of emotion he was only just beginning to understand. Gratitude, curiosity, awe. Her face, which he had first seen as a beautiful, empty mask, was now alive with a spirit that was entirely her own. "Kelzy," she said. It was the first time she had spoken with her own voice. It came not from the ship, but from her lips. It was quieter than the ship's melodic echo, softer, with a resonant warmth that was infinitely more powerful. It was the most incredible sound he had ever heard. He couldn't find any words. He simply reached out and gently touched her face, his calloused thumb tracing one of the intricate white markings on her cheek. It was a question, a confirmation that she was real, that this moment was real. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. The connection between them was no longer an invasive, technological symbiosis. It was a simple, profound human touch. They stood there for a long time in the quiet stillness of the bridge, two survivors adrift in the silent sea of stars. He was no longer a failed therapist running from his past, and she was no longer a component waiting for a command. They were just two people, a man and a woman, who had found each other in a broken-down starship and built a new future out of the ruins of their prisons. The journey ahead was unknown, but they would face it together. The silence that settled on the bridge of the Stardust Drifter was a new kind of quiet. It was not the sterile, programmed silence of before, but a living stillness, filled with the warmth of shared breath and the profound weight of a future that had, moments ago, not existed. Kelzy's hand remained on Hellotia's face, a simple point of contact that grounded them both in the incredible reality of the moment. Her skin was soft, real, no longer a component of a larger machine, but the living vessel of a free soul. She took a small, shaky breath, the first she had ever taken by choice, and the sensation seemed to ripple through her. Her golden eyes, so full of depth and light, watched him with an intensity that was both ancient and brand new. He slowly lowered his hand, though the phantom sensation of her skin against his lingered. There were 1,000 things to say, questions to ask, a new universe of conversation to be had between them, but words felt clumsy and inadequate. Instead, he acted on a simple human impulse. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice quiet. Her brow furrowed slightly, a beautiful, unpracticed expression of confusion. "Hungry," she repeated, the word a foreign shape in her mouth. "The vessel's nutrient reservoirs are at 92%. "No," Kelzy said softly, a smile touching his lips. "Not the vessel, you. Are you hungry?" She considered this, her gaze turning inward for a moment. He could almost see her sifting through the new sensations, cataloging the strange feelings of a body that was suddenly her own. The faint, hollow ache in her stomach, the energy deficit after the battle, and her own rebirth. She looked back at him, a flicker of wonder in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I am." He led her from the bridge, his hand hovering near the small of her back, not guiding her as property, but offering support should she need it. She walked with a slow, deliberate grace, each step an exploration. He saw her bare feet press against the floor plating, her toes flexing as she felt the texture. She touched the curving wall of the corridor, her long, elegant fingers tracing its smooth surface, her head tilted as if listening to its silent song. This ship had been her body for her entire existence, but she was only now truly discovering it. In the small galley, he took out a nutrient paste packet, standard freighter fare, bland and utilitarian. He hesitated, then put it back. That was sustenance for a component. She deserved better. He rummaged deeper into his stores and found one of his few luxuries, a vacuum-sealed earth apple, saved for a day when he needed a reminder of something real and organic. This felt like that day. He sliced it, the crisp sound sharp in the quiet galley. He held out a slice to her. She took it from him, her fingers brushing his. She examined it, her gaze analytical, curious. She brought it to her nose, inhaling its sweet, clean scent. Then she took a small, tentative bite. Kelzy watched as a supernova of sensation exploded behind her eyes, the crunch, the burst of juice on her tongue, the complex interplay of sweet and tart. It was the first flavor she had ever known. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, leaving a glistening trail on her pale skin. It was not a tear of sorrow, but of overwhelming, joyous sensory input. In that moment, sharing a simple piece of fruit, their partnership was sealed more profoundly than it had been in the heat of battle. He was no longer just her rescuer. He was the one who had opened the door to life, and she was the one who was brave enough to step through it. Weeks passed. They drifted through the quiet, forgotten sectors of the galaxy, giving themselves time. Time to heal, time to learn. For Hellotia, every day was a litany of firsts. The first time she saw her own reflection and understood it was her. The first time she chose what to wear from the simple shipboard clothes Kelzy had. The first time she experienced a nightmare, flickering images of the crumbling palace, and woke to find Kelzy's steady presence beside her, a solid anchor in the dark. For Kelzy, it was a process of unlearning. He had to stop thinking of her in relation to the ship and see her only as herself. He learned the subtle tells of her moods, the way the intricate white lines on her skin seemed to glow a little brighter when she was happy, the almost imperceptible tilt of her head when she was deep in thought. He learned that her mind was astonishingly brilliant, capable of processing complex astrogation data as easily as she could deconstruct the themes in an ancient piece of human poetry he read to her. Their intimacy grew, a slow, gentle tide. It began with conversations late into the ship's night cycle, their voices low in the soft light of the main cabin. She would ask him about Earth, about rain and snow and trees, her questions full of a longing for a world of senses she was only just beginning to understand. He, in turn, found himself speaking of his past not as a source of shame, but as a part of the journey that had led him to her. He was no longer running. One evening, they were on the observation deck, the great dome showing a star-birthing nebula that painted their faces in hues of violet and rose. Hellotia stood close to the viewport, her hand resting on the transparent surface. "When I was the ship," she said, her voice a soft murmur, "I saw this, but it was only data, wavelengths, gravitational values, particle densities. I did not see the beauty." She turned to face him, her golden eyes reflecting the swirling colors of the nebula. "You gave me beauty, Kelzy." He moved to stand before her, his heart aching with an emotion so powerful it felt like it could tear him apart and remake him all at once. He lifted his hand, gently cupping her jaw. "You were always beautiful," he said, his voice thick. "You just needed to be able to see it for yourself." This time, when he leaned in to kiss her, it was not the desperate, frantic connection of the mindscape. It was slow, deliberate, a choice made by two whole people. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, then they responded to his with a blossoming warmth that sent a tremor through his entire being. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, a physical promise that echoed the bond they had forged in her mind. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and felt her body melt against his, her arms circling his neck. It was a perfect synchronous moment, a connection that was both physical and something far deeper, a harmony of two souls who had found their resonant frequency in the vast, silent emptiness of space. Later, she led him by the hand to the bridge. The command cradle sat in the center of the room, no longer a throne of servitude, but a relic of a past life. She approached it, her movements confident. "I can still feel it," she said, looking at the cradle. "The ship, it's waiting, it's a part of me, but it is not me. I am not its bride, I am its soul." She reached out and laid her palm flat against the cradle's smooth surface. The bridge filled with a soft, golden light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. On the main screen, system diagnostics bloomed, showing a level of organic integration and efficiency that was orders of magnitude beyond anything the Athelian engineers had ever achieved. She could still connect, still command the vessel with a thought, but the connection was now one of choice. She could plug in, and she could walk away. He watched, mesmerized, as she sent a command to the engines, the ship's hum deepening in perfect, immediate response. Then she lifted her hand, and the light faded. She was separate. She was whole. A few days later, while scanning interstellar news feeds, they found what they were looking for. An anonymous data burst, traced to the disabled Athelian warship, had been picked up by the Galactic Concord. The ship's logs contained everything: the illegal bioforming of a sentient being, the failsafe designed to murder her mind, the unprovoked attack on a civilian vessel. House Athel was ruined. Their assets were seized, their leaders arrested. The last chain to her past was broken. They were truly, finally free. That night, they lay together in Kelzy's bunk, her head resting on his chest, his fingers idly tracing the patterns on her arm. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "Anywhere we want," he answered, pressing a kiss to her silver-white hair. For the first time in a long time, the future was not a void to escape into, but a destination to be chosen. "We have a good ship. We could haul cargo, or explore, or just see what's out there." She lifted her head, her face illuminated by the faint light of a distant star through the small viewport. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her lips. "I would like that," she said, "to see everything." The next morning, they stood together on the bridge. Not with him in the pilot's seat and her in the cradle, but side by side at the main console. He charted a course to a system rumored to have planets with sapphire oceans and forests of crystalline trees, a place of impossible wonder. "Ready?" he asked, his hand resting over the navigation controls. She placed her hand over his, her slender fingers lacing with his. "Ready," she affirmed. Together, they pushed the controls forward. The Stardust Drifter surged into the non-space of FTL, leaving their old lives behind. They were no longer the salvager who had bought a ship, or the woman who had come with it. They were explorers, partners, lovers, two souls who had found their home not on any planet, but in each other, heading toward a horizon that was bright with infinite possibility.